All right, welcome to a special episode of the Spike Week podcast, YouTube show, whatever you want to call it. Some Spike Week video and audio content here. I'm, of course, your host and creator of Spike Week, Erik Beimfohr. I got two special guests with me here today, Shawn, Siegele, Colm Kelly from RotoViz. And as I bet, if I didn't even put a title on this YouTube video, this podcast episode, they might have an idea what the three of us were going to talk about here today. But I actually think it's a really great conversation about zero running back, and not just this, early running back versus zero running back wars, and all the kind of the things that have become mainstream in terms of really just running back conversation, not zero running back conversation, but how do we approach the running back position? How do we structure our teams? And in 2025, I think we have a very unique landscape. We've been going for years and years and years, making wide receivers more expensive and running backs less expensive. And then last year, we had a little bit of a slap in the face, maybe to the zero running back drafters. Saquon and Derrick Henry and the like came out and said, No. Marvin Harrison and Drake London, that's cute. That's very cute that you're going to take those guys at the 1-2 turn. But let me show you what the running backs can still do. So what does all that mean? How has this adjusted the current market? And what does 2025 look for in terms of opportunities within, the running back landscape, zero running back? How can we put some teams together is what we're going to talk about here today. We have not scripted this. So when Shawn comes in and starts telling you guys to draft all running backs early, I'll be as shocked as you guys. But of course, first, I haven't got a chance to talk to you guys in a while. Shawn, how are things? I was telling you before, we're in the thick of it now. It's 2025 fantasy football season. How's that going?
Good. I think that the draft landscape last year, I thought it was an absolute blast, right? And then with what then transpired, we now have an absolutely fantastic environment in which to, for each individual drafter to pursue the style, to pursue the individual players that, he or she really wants to go after, right? You're not pushed down a single path in a way that you never completely are, obviously, but there's so much freedom to both execute maybe your core beliefs and at the same time take detours or build teams, go down paths that are just so free and so interesting compared to maybe what we would have done in the past.
I love that, Colm. Of course, I will ask you how you're doing too. I'm not going to slight you. We're all friends.
We're all friends. I'm doing good as well.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback off what you mentioned at the start, I do think that part of it and part of the perception is there's obviously success from certain draft strategies over the past 12 months, but I also think that has been very strongly manipulated by one Saquon Barkley. You mentioned Derrick Henry. Josh Jacobs had success throughout the season. Even during the season, we've seen Joe Mixon have a good run at it. So I think it's kind of a combination of how the start of the season played out. Me and Shawn talked, I think it was last week, Shawn, about how the end of the season actually played out versus what people's perception of it is. And while it was the other part I would put to the, the downside for last year in zero RB being, the running backs generally stayed healthy outside of Christian McCaffrey, and then we had more wide receiver injuries than we would have tended to have in the past. So there's like a kind of a perfect storm of it all rolling into one to cause a little bit of trouble. The other part, you mentioned the popularity, and I had Tom Strachan on over the last couple of days on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show, and he pulled some stuff looking from the roster construction explorer at zero RB over the last 4 years, and in terms of like underdog drafts last year, it was used 21.1% of the time in terms of people drafting zero RB teams. That was up from 2023 from 9.5%. So like significant jump. But I do think that this year we're going to see it revert back towards that 10 to 12%. But the interesting part of it was robust running back last year, which, so we would talk about from time to time. It was only drafted 2.4% last year. So basically 10 times more zero RB teams were drafted in underdogs competitions last year, and then 50% were hero RB. So zero B and Hero RB were 71% of the time. But I do think it's interesting to see those jumps in terms of how much it was used last year. But I have strongly been of the opinion for many, many years that people draft zero RB teams or call them zero RB teams. But in terms of the zero RB principles that go along with that, like I think people will class zero RB in terms of like the running backs prior to say round 5 or 6, but they're not really talking about like how they're managing league tight end or how they're trying to build out the rest of their roster. So while 20% of the teams were drafted in that way, I would question how many of them were drafted in a way that we would technically draft them particular rosters. And then, of course, the other part of it was like the teams that went heavy running back had a lot of success throughout kind of the regular season. But then when it got to the actual playoffs, a lot of those teams like completely faltered. So the upside was still there in some of those kind of builds that we would be trying to build out. But I wanted to give Tom a shout out because I thought the information he shared on that particular show was interesting based on kind of the trends that we kind of felt that were there. But obviously, like from 2021, like we're talking about, like you mentioned the word mainstream earlier, 2021, 4.3% of the teams on Underdog were zero RB teams. So like, you know, we go 4%, 6.7%, 9.5 to 21.2. Like that's a big jump. So I think what we're going to eventually talk through today is like, is 2025 a good year? And I think based on, I don't think there's going to be the same amount of teams drafted in that way, which again, I think helps us as drafters. Because when we go into a draft room, and then if you have like basically 20% of the field trying to draft a zero RB roster, you know, a lot of them are going to have like similar targets, similar objectives. And like me and Shawn have been drafting together for years, and there'll be times where in the past, Shawn, we're like, I can't believe we can get these guys in like round 9, round 10. Now, like we're talking about how it's changed, like those guys are in like round 5. It's like the landscape's changed, but I do think that we'll have a swing back in terms of people using the strategy, which I think we'll talk about as we go along, but I think will help things this year.
100%. I think the interesting part of that, starting with kind of the utilization, is that's kind of the core. Like people might say, how do you become, right? How did you become indoctrinated into the cult of zero running back, right? Is what the guy who loved Saquon and Derrick Henry last year would say. And what I would say that I think gets lost in a lot of this whole running back debate conversation is that if everyone decided, which still last year, right, it took a big jump into the 20% range, which what I did, which I'm not saying is correct at all, was say, okay, the running backs have gotten cheaper. I can actually push it a little bit even further and be what some people might call extreme zero running back, right? But extreme zero running back last year still meant like, I don't know, Chase, you know, you still had Chase Brown and Jalen Warren and, you know, whoever, Brian Robinson, right? You still had those guys on to like truly starting. I know Chase Brown wasn't necessarily a starting running back at the beginning, but you had the talented potential starting running backs on good offenses that were cheap then when everybody else was maybe taking their first running back a little bit earlier. That obviously, interestingly, worked and didn't work. The running backs in the extreme zero running back case were hits. The running backs weren't the problem last year, right? If you drafted even, you know, James Conner and obviously Bucky Irving, Chuba Hubbard, like there's like an infinite amount. My highest owned running back, well, I shouldn't say that. Tyler Algier was my highest owned running back, who I wouldn't call a hit because, again, like you mentioned, Bijan stayed healthy the whole season. That's what happens, right? It's kind of binary with a backup like that. But Jordan Mason, I feel like, was like one of the best picks in fantasy last year. He also just got hurt, right? He suffered the San Francisco 49er running back issues that everybody seems to deal with. And so it's like, but was he a bad pick? No, I would argue he was one of the best picks in fantasy. But then the wide receivers who you may have paired with them, Rashee Rice, right? We don't got to relive that. I know Shawn probably doesn't want to relive that in particular, but his quarterback, right, rolls up on it and blows out his knee. Chris Godwin is in essentially garbage time and shatters his ankle. Tyreek Hill turns into a pumpkin. Justin Jefferson is fine, but the Vikings defense is all of a sudden really, really good. So Justin Jefferson's having a bunch of, 15 to 18 point games and not the ceiling games. It ultimately was like Jamar Chase or bust. And then over the course of the season, but particularly in the playoff week, the money weeks, Mailk Nabers really came through.
Don't forget about
saved.
Nico Collins, catching the 75-yard touchdown and pulling his hamstring as he did that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just so many examples.
Or on the opposite side of the Saquon one, you mentioned the situation with the Vikings, the Eagles defense were just laughably good. So we don't have to throw the ball to AJ Ryan over again.
And they were outstanding and efficient and earned targets just like we all expected. But when your team throws the ball, like Navy, they're running the triple option. What are you going to do? The efficiency is great, but so you can only score so many fantasy points on 6 targets because you threw the ball 18 times. But that's the part that has constantly stuck with me heading into this season. That Shawn, I'm kind of curious how you're thinking about it, because I actually don't think what most people would think about as the principles of zero running back failed at all in 2025. There were and there really were no elite tight ends even on the board last year. But if you took a George Kittle, who doesn't like George Kittle, Brock Bowers is one of the biggest tight end hit, and Trey McBride, tight end, great. Elite quarterback, great. Cheap quarterback, awesome. Cheap running back, awesome. It was just these superstar wide receivers that didn't come through. And we fast forward to this year, and it could absolutely be just prisoner of the moment. But I cannot recall a group of elite wide receivers, in the first 2, maybe even 3 rounds, wherever we want to go. I kind of would go to Rashee Rice, but we could call it AJ Brown, we could call it Ladd McConkey, we could call it whatever in some range that is just give me all these guys. I used, even as a wide receiver guy, I used to say that first round wide receiver, he's fine, right? It's fine, but I'm not excited about it. All these guys at the top end feel there's a depth of elite strength at the top of wide receiver that makes me feel even more comfortable than last year. And the prices have now decreased kind of because of the tornado that was the running back, apocalypse last year. So how are you thinking about kind of that dynamic and then blending it into what we have specifically at the top of drafts this year?
Yeah, one of the things that I tried to certainly tell our subscribers, our listeners going into 2024 was that, and actually going into 2023, because I thought there was a real chance for it in 2023 as well. I was almost surprised that it took us until 2024. But the surprise element is just that the seasons are fairly unique. But the point was that a 2016 season is coming, right? You think about 2015, where everybody gets hurt, the zero RB players dominate, you have this huge swing in ADP, and then somewhat surprisingly, immediately following that, you get this fantastic season for running backs, and it sort of stomps on everything that was happening from, say, 2011 to 2015. And then you end up having this really pretty good opportunity to apply the principles that, you could argue, especially in best ball, the principles that we know work in most seasons. You get this run from 2017 to, say, 2022-ish before things really start to change ADP-wise in 2023, where even with a little bit of a top-end running back golden age, zero RB, very successful across pretty much all formats. What happened last year, in many ways, it's just a very normal season in that a few things get pushed a little bit in this direction or a little bit in that direction, where, like you mentioned, it's certainly very reasonable that wide receivers get hurt. They're out there playing football. You can get hurt. It's certainly very reasonable that elite running backs from a skill perspective would create big plays. And maybe especially in an environment where they play for teams that are very difficult to defend, and in a world where defenses don't really care that much about defending them. Now, in some of those specific instances, it's maybe more of a pick your poison than we don't care about it. But certainly when you have those things kind of working together, certainly no surprise that Saquon Barkley is good. No surprise that Derrick Henry is good, and that they break off big plays. The big plays, when they define so much of what happens in any given season, and yet I do feel like most drafters or many drafters are still a little bit reluctant to view creating exposure to big plays as really a key component of how you draft. The only thing that really stands out to me as being surprising is that we had so many kind of mediocre running backs who stayed healthy for a long time and got more work than you would expect if you're mediocre, right? That's the part where I would be surprised if it occurred again, simply because extreme running back health is always a little bit tricky. And even when you get it, you don't necessarily benefit, right? So one of the things I was kind of looking at here that actually surprised me a little bit, but 5 of the 15 running backs who scored 40 plus, and you might, in terms of like the real impact, you might want to put the threshold higher, but 40 plus in the 15, 16, 17 time period were pure zero RB guys in Spears, Irving, Chase Brown, 3 people we were very heavy on. And then you might call it, I mean, obviously it's just completely out of nowhere, Amir Abdullah deal. And then Jerome Ford. And I mean, Ford isn't one that we were recommending, but you can certainly see why that would have worked. And Ford actually put up great numbers last year. His peripherals, according to Sports Info Solutions, were fantastic, which, I mean, that's something that, like in a very specific argument type of thing, makes it a little bit weird in terms of what we're looking at for Judkins and Sampson. But it's certainly a 3 running back depth chart there that maybe creates both opportunities and problems for drafters. When you look at Spears, right, he scores more points than Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, and Alvin Kamara combined in that stretch. Now, partly that's because of injuries, obviously. But you think back to last year and you're like, those guys were awesome. It's like, well, I mean, they did all 3 generate negative points above average per attempt, according to SIS, and negative WAR. So partly you're looking at it and saying, it's really kind of weak depth charts that kept. One of the things is, what are the Titans doing, right? I mean, that part is weird. But Pollard, I think it's easier to look at what he did and be like, I don't exactly see where the numbers that SIS is giving me, and they seem a little bit too down on what, because when we watch Tony Pollard create some important plays, right? Mixon and Kamara is trickier, but I mean, they were going to play and they were going to have a great workload as long as they were healthy. Is that going to be the case this year? But one of the things that we got last season, which I don't think it's the entire story by any stretch. I think that the running back health that we got is kind of its own thing, certainly. But in terms of the workloads for guys who are maybe just okay, right? When you're talking about having a real moat around your workload as an NFL running back, you're talking about being a Saquon Barkley. You're talking about being someone who was unreal. I mean, even guys like a Breece Hall. Now, you say, well, partly it's because Breece Hall was awful, right? So if you don't perform...
Another big, I know he was going in the first round, but another big zero RB bro, L, right? Is we all love Breece Hall. We thought he was awesome. And then, maybe, is he awesome? I don't know.
Yeah, separately from all this other stuff, that part, I thought, that was heartburn inducing there. But you don't have any moat unless you're unreal. And the class last year at running back was not positioned to put pressure on these guys. We did see that finally the depth at the top was replaced pretty well. So now, I mean, you look at 2025 and you're like, you've got some older backs who are really good, and guys like Barkley and Henry, but we also have filled in behind with a lot of profiles that are pretty interesting over the course of several years. And certainly you still have that devastating Brooks injury, but these guys are maybe staying a little bit healthier. We now have the depth back at the top at running back. But what 2025 gives us is this season where, I mean, you think about someone like Trevor Etienne, who, I mean, actually goes, I mean, his ADP, you can both understand at the same time, it's super weird, where, like, I mean, 2 of my very favorite players are Bashal Tutin and Cam Scatteraboo. That's true for many, many people. Trevor Etienne just won a handful of picks behind them. He was a committee guy in college, and you look at that and you're like, okay, well, a committee guy in the NFL as a rookie in a crowded depth chart, I mean, do you really want that? But there are also things about, I mean, number one, where he went, and then number 2, you do have at least some stretched comparisons to someone like James Cook. This player not being drafted at all, right? And when you think through how that then washes back on all of these guys who are assumed to no longer be dead zone backs because we had a season where people stayed healthy, that's the part where 2024 is probably misleading. Everything that happened in 2024 individually, I mean, all those things are very reasonable. They happen together. It creates a weird looking season. But I mean, that was going to happen at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say on that, Shawn has been like, since 2016, he has been like talking about at some point it's going to come back around. So eventually
the crazy guy in like
almost 10
like
years
the
later.
world apocalypse movies,
Yeah.
where like there's always a mad scientist that the president
like
or whatever, does not believe. He's like, something's coming, and the politicians are always like, shut up, crazy guy or whatever. And then 8 years later, it happens, and he's doing the I told you so and saving the world. That was Shawn.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that, so full transparency for anybody that hasn't, I wrote an article because I do believe this year, for a lot of the reasons that you guys have outlined here, is 2025 sets up to be a really, really good year for zero running back. And one of the reasons that I feel that way is, of course, the strength of the wide receivers at the top. Not only did we get, like what Shawn said, a kind of a boost of depth at the top, right? The Dalvin Cooks of the world constantly going in the first or second round are gone, and we've probably finally started to properly price the Kamaras and the Mixons, right?
Josh Jacobs is going in the second round.
There's even the running back bros I've noticed are getting a little squeamish on Josh Jacobs, which I don't know what that means exactly. Normally that was a flag plant kind of a guy. But we got this influx of young superstar wide receivers at the top, right? Lab McConkey, Brian Thomas, Mailk Nabers. Puka's. We talk about Puka like he's been in the league for like 8 years, and it's like, no, this guy's, very much in the beginning of his prime, right? We don't have to talk about JJ and CD and Chase and all that, but Garrett Wilson is still around, and there's no Devontae Adams, and maybe no Rodgers is a good thing. I guess we'll find out, right? There's just a ton of different options. We get a mediocre wide receiver class in terms of the rookie class coming in, but we get what has been perceived as a loaded running back class. So we do get some of that. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty is going in the first round of drafts, but we get this insertion of more depth of those running backs. And so that moat idea is fascinating, because the players who maybe we didn't ever think heading into last season had that moat, and I'm not sure that, like, say, Chuba Hubbard did, but Chuba Hubbard ended up having one of the biggest moats around his workload, which was not expected. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks' health played a big part into that, but there just wasn't, right? Trey Benson and all these guys, like I'm not saying I dislike any of them. Ray Davis, like I like all these guys fine. But when we compare to this running back class, I mean, there was multiple first round picks. There was multiple second round picks, right? That some of these guys, the draft capital looks worse, but it's like, I don't know, they would have been the first running back taken last year in the NFL draft. And so we kind of get this compounding effect of, oh man, the top wide receivers are probably even better than they were last year. But this depth of running back, which in turn decreases the moat players, right? There are fewer moat players because there's, right, Tyrone Tracy gets Cam Scatteraboo in that backfield. There's a bunch of these Etienne and the other Etienne, Travis Etienne, and Tank Bigsby get Tootin into that backfield, and on and on and on, right? There's a bunch of those guys that we now get this depth. I'm not saying I have my favorites just like you guys do. I'm not saying I can always pick out which of those running backs are the guys that are going to pop up and steal that work from those guys, or benefit from an injury, whatever. But this like combination of all this stuff is like, okay, now this feels more powerful to me than last year, because the ADPs have gotten a little bit more advantageous for wide receiver heavy starts, or Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, right? Elite quarterback. There's a bunch of things that we can do at non-running back positions at the top. And I have a depth in the later rounds that maybe last year just didn't really exist. And so it seems to jump out to me a little bit that this environment is very unique this year. We have superstar young tight ends. We have a bunch of superstar young wide receivers and an influx of talent at the running back position that last year probably just truly didn't have. So maybe, we shake up the ADPs into a blender this year. And when we spit out the results, even if we get some of the running back health, even if we get some of the wide receiver injuries, there's just more depth on both sides to offset some of that to where we don't get that same run out from last year. Like even if Saquon stays healthy, even if Derrick Henry stays healthy, it still feels like 2025 looks a lot different, even if we get that same run out.
The one part as well, when we're talking about the elite wide receivers, you mentioned Brock Bowers and Trey McBride there. I think that's part of the reason as well to have that extra comfort at the top tiers. Like they are basically in that top tier when we're talking about the players in the first 2 rounds. The other thing with like where they go, and this is part of you talking about the rookies. I think anyone, and this is again the evolution for this year of zero RB and who's drafting teams. I think people last year may have been comfortable like dipping their toes into zero RB after like there was some of the bigger tournaments won the year prior with zero RB teams. But I think you mentioned earlier, Jalen Warren, Chase Brown kind of going in that range. They were players who were already NFL players who you had seen do some things on the NFL field. And you could tell yourself the picture, like their running mates were going in the same range, betting basically on which one was going to win out the backfield. Whereas I do not think that the people who got, let's call it stung, like drafted it and it didn't work out, and they think they're back to it doesn't work. Like it often was like if zero RB worked, people would have said Saquon Barkley got hurt and that's why it worked. And then now Saquon Barkley stayed healthy, so it's just zero RB doesn't work. But the people who tried it, I also think that they're going to be very reluctant to have their first 3 running backs be rookies, or have 5 or 6 running backs drafted and have 50% of them be rookie running backs. Where I think people like you, Erik, or Shawn, or people who've drafted zero RB for many years and went through the different principles and like to draft rookie players, I think they will be comfortable with it. So I think kind of some of the, just to piggyback on the stuff you were saying, I think all this kind of pushes it back to like the actual landscape being more favorable based on what people's now perceptions and expectations are for this season. And the other part with the running backs, I mentioned Josh Jacobs, like jokingly, he's going as RB10, but like, does
Josh Jacobs ever get mentioned non-jokingly?
I don't. But like, we're looking at players in a Saquon Barkley who had an absolutely tremendous season, no doubt about it, or Derrick Henry, or basically the entire season. We're looking at like an age of running back who like players are playing longer, maybe peaks last longer, but the likelihood of them having like a recurring injury or picking up some strains is getting higher and higher as they get older and older. But the other one that's in there is like Jonathan Taylor in the second round, and he finished the season so strong last year. But up until those last 3 weeks of the season, like it wasn't a good season for Taylor, and he's in the same environment as he was previously. So I think that there's like a lot of stuff with those opening 2-round running backs that's getting overlooked, like the veteran crew, the things could go wrong. But I also think that fits into the narrative of like round 10 and beyond, those rookies that people are going to be like, I don't fancy those. And I think we'll be saying like, please give me more.
Yeah, it's so true that and that's the big thing with me that I was kind of alluding to at the top, where a big reason, like basically all of my strategy in any form of kind of, I don't want to call it gambling, sports speculation. Let's call it, right. We're speculating on this. Yeah, I'm investing. I don't think my wife would appreciate the amount of money I invest into baseball, but that's neither here nor there. The reason why Shawn has obviously, how long ago was it now? More than a decade ago, right? Outlined why this thing works, right? And we've seen it work tons and tons of times. And I always think about it as like zero R running back principles, not this, like, we don't have to create this hard, rigid, like, I can't draft the running back before this round, or I can't draft the running back before RB number X, Y, whatever, because it's fluid, right? Every single year. But the principles are really why it's so powerful. And those principles can be applied to a lot of different structures. And the big thing, even at a 21% last year is what you guys came up with in terms of how much, how many teams were drafting zero running back. That still means there's 80%. That still means the overwhelming majority of people are not drafting in this way. And then we can also draft differently from within there. As you said, so there's an X percentage of those teams that still don't feel comfortable taking Tootin and Scadaboo, right? And all these different guys.
Or don't take an elite tight end.
Yeah, or they still forego Brock Bowers and Trey McBride and George Kittle. They maybe don't like Lamar or Josh Allen, and it's like you may have punted off some of the reasons why these principles are so powerful, even though you technically
or you may have drafted like wide receivers who just like kind of don't fit the profiles of the players you want.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bunch of different things all coming together, and those principles are so powerful, and they're not utilized very much. I constantly say, like, if everyone starts drafting, and maybe I was just foolish, and last year this did happen, but I didn't really think so. If everyone just starts drafting like the first 40 picks are wide receivers, okay, it's time to start considering maybe how can we manipulate this, because we are then all drafting the same goddamn teams, right? But until everybody is not, and until I think people are following these principles how I think that they should be followed, why would I go away from what is a known winning strategy in all formats of this game that's not utilized to the extent that I think it should be utilized? And so I think, again, we're getting a course correction in 2025 that I would agree with you. I would expect it bounces more back to 2023 levels or something like that. And like everybody feels burned, like even if you're not like a zero running back bro, because you just followed the list, right? Last year, the ADP list, there was like a lot of wide receivers and not a lot of the RB24, I believe, was like Jaylen Warren last year. It was like, that's the RB24 in round 8, Jaylen Warren. Like, that's crazy, right? So even if you didn't love the strategy, you ended up becoming like, you drafted more zero running back teams unknowingly because you're just taking the best player available at that time. And this year, I think that's very different. And even the sharpest of the sharp, like zero running back minds, it's still like we're all human. It comes in your brain and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to fade Saquon this year, right? Or I can take this third round guy or whatever. And it's not wrong. You can still draft very good teams, but if I'm trying to exploit my competition, which is the goal, like I don't think I can make the best pick on every team I'll ever draft. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, quite frankly. I drafted Trey Lance in the 7th round on a lot of teams a few years ago. And so like we all make mistakes, right? But if I continue down this path with these principles in mind, and try to exploit how I know that my opponents are building teams, like it's just even that much more powerful before we even talk about all the stuff here about why maybe it's even a little bit better in 2025. So let's do some stuff about 2025 specific to this player pool. We've talked about how it all comes together from last year into this year. I actually want to start with those tight ends because I think they're like maybe the most unique part compared to last year. Last year, tight end 1, just using like say underdog ADP and stuff, was Sam Laporta. We all love Sam Laporta. Well, I think a lot of us drafted a ton of Sam Laporta in his rookie season in round 13 and won a lot of money because of Sam Laporta. As great as he is, this is a very different player and a very different cost from Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. How do you think those two players specifically play out? We can start with you, Shawn. How do Brock Bowers and Trey McBride play into what that means for kind of how we put some of these principles into play? If I assume that you believe that those guys are big targets and can be big differentiators in 2025, right? What's the trickle down effect there? If I'm spending, a first round pick in FFPC, right? In tight end premium, these are first round picks. Maybe the 101 is Brock Bowers, right? That's a very different landscape than last year with Sam Laporta as the tight end 1.
The tight ends are so interesting because the value and the tactics vary so dramatically by format. And I mean, some of the analyses that we've done suggest that elite tight end in underdog is really not very strongly recommended. And then you've kind of got to go through and work through this idea of some of these things are just going to be much more difficult to really know because we're dealing with so few players. When you're talking about analyzing something like zero RB, it's super easy to, at least from a big picture perspective, understand what works, why it works, and how we should execute things with receivers and running backs and what have you. It can be a little bit tricky when you're talking about Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, Travis Kelce, and then what's the next wave? And, are a Brock Bowers and a Trey McBride the same type of thing, or are they not? Could they be something better. The problem with Sam Laporta, and this is one of the reasons that we did not draft him a lot last year, is just the Detroit offense. It was so tricky. We didn't draft a lot of Amon-Ra either, which, I mean, and he ended up having obviously a very good season. The question that I have with Bowers and McBride in formats that are very touchdown heavy does go back to just how many touchdowns they'll score, because touchdowns tend to be this thing that, you can look at and say, well, we can't predict that, mostly ignore it. And I think mostly what you want to do is say this player is this much better than his competition, or this guy is unreal. You kind of got to let the touchdowns follow. It's a little different if you're looking at a Patriots offense with Gronkowski, a Drew Brees offense with Jimmy Graham, a Travis Kelce offense with Patrick Mahomes, and saying we're going to let that stuff just be and not really worry too much about the touchdowns, versus kind of what Bowers and McBride are dealing with, and kind of what your risk is when they're cheap versus when they're very expensive. Having said all of that, they're so good compared to everybody else. And if the touchdowns do follow, then they are going to make a difference for you. And it was interesting hearing you describe how you're looking at the receivers and where the pockets of strength and weakness are. I really like the wide receiver group for 2025. But mostly what I like is round one and then stretching through Brian Thomas. And then I think we've got a pretty straightforward. It's not to say that no one after the wide receiver cliff, if you're willing to call it that, is going to hit. Obviously, some people will. Some people, even though they don't hit, will be very important tactically. But we have just a very clear-cut wide receiver cliff at the end of round 8. And so when we're building our teams, we more or less want to address our wide receiver needs, the core element of how we want to build our team, through those 8 rounds. I'm a little more nervous about some of the round 2 and round 3 type of receivers. And so if you give me Bowers and McBride as an option, I have a hard time resisting that. And then the same thing kind of in round 3, which, stretching into that round 3, round 4. I mean, there's always so much risk in saying, oh, we saw this rookie and he was one of the greatest ever. He's going to take the next step and be the number one. Having said that, I do somewhat struggle with Jayden Daniels being the third QB because he seems to be the best player and have the highest ceiling. Is he the safest of the 3 when you're talking about spending that much? Probably not.
Yep.
But when you look
just a year ago, do you remember just a year ago we had all the he needs to learn how to slide, he's going to get sawed in half and all, right? The discourse was, I can't take 10th round Jayden Daniels because he doesn't know how to slide. And it's like now he goes in front of Jalen Hurts. And probably should go number 1.
Yeah, I was going to try and make that clear. I don't think Seanson he's surprised he's number 3 because that's too high. He's surprised.
Okay,
he's number 3
I see.
That's too low.
You think he's just? Do you think he's currently already the best quarterback, or at least fantasy quarterback, or like what happened last year is just like we wet our beak and we're in for the training wheels are even about to come off on this superstar?
Yeah, you look at what he did at the end of last season, and that's probably what he is. And they've added talent around him. It's always this question of, and I don't think that even though they had such a good year last year, that you can really be that confident still in the Commanders coaches. If you're saying year 2, one of the things that happens is that the defenses adjust and you have to run your best stuff even better. Because you can run into the problem of trying to adjust before they've really taken what you do best away, and then you're just voluntarily giving up the best things you do. Yep. But you do need to be able to counterpunch as well. Are we going to get that from the staff? That's a little bit of a question. But Jayden Daniels is the best passer of the 3 by far. Will that manifest in 2025? That's a little bit more difficult of a question, but he's going to be the best, right? And then, the rushing value is just behind Lamar Jackson. So then you're trying to figure out how many times are these guys, what's the pressure on these 3 teams? Who's going to have the weakest defense? Who's going to be in the most shootouts? But you look at then that structurally and you're saying, well, if I'm going, And we've got research from multiple sources suggesting that 6 and 8 at receiver is probably the best way to do it. Certainly if someone came back to me and said
all formats, or like close enough to all formats.
Well, I think if you're looking at a 2-3-1 where you just have to get more receivers, then even if the scoring itself is not as receiver friendly, you need to have that. It makes it in some ways even more important to have the guys who could potentially weekly score for you.
The guys who can score, even though scoring is bringing down the position as a whole, the guys who can kind of catapult over the top of that are even more impactful.
Right. So if someone comes back to me and says, I've got this information saying it's probably 5. I mean, I'm certainly fine with that. There are lots of ways that you can do it. And 6, probably the best if your goal is to score points. There are going to be tactical things where if you're trying to win tournaments, again, maybe that's a little bit different, right? But if we're looking at that and we're saying, okay, and any individual drafter can simply look at the areas on their board and say, this is where I'm less comfortable with receiver. I want to take a detour here. But if you're uncomfortable with receiver in 2, then Bowers and McBride are just going to look like unreal picks to you.
Yep.
If you're uncomfortable with them, say at the 3-4 turn. And one of the things that's tricky for me is I think once you get into 4, then you're like, okay, well, these are the guys I kind of thought maybe I should be drafting in 3. And so now I don't want to go to QB.
Yeah.
But if that's not the way you're looking at it, then guys like Allen and Jackson and Daniels make a lot of sense because you can still come back either if you take one of those detours or both of them. I mean, you might want to save one of them for running back again to balance out what your objectives are again to win the whole thing, as opposed to maybe be in good shape in your league. But you can do that and still get your 6 and 8, your 5 and 8, however you want to approach that.
I love that. So I want to stay calm on this elite quarterbacks and tight ends, because I think some might say that those two things can be some of the most advantageous reasons to draft 0 running back, right? You're still going to have a very strong wide receiver core. You're going to dominate at quarterback and you're going to dominate at tight end. That seems good, right? That seems pretty good. And then I can figure out the running back thing later through picking some of the right rookies, chaos playing out in my favor, whatever. Bucky's winning was a different win condition than Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason needing Christian McCaffrey to only have one leg, and Bucky just needed to be playing next to Rachaad White, who stinks of football, right? But there's a lot of ways that these different running backs can win. In this year, are you feeling like that's potentially an even bigger, a better lever to pull is those elite quarterbacks and elite tight ends leading the witness slightly a little bit? Because I agree with what Shawn said about that cliff, but that cliff being in round 8-ish still allows us to accomplish that 5 and 8 or 6 and 8, even with a Trey McBride or a Brock Bowers and or Jaden Daniels, right? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, whatever your flavor is, it still allows you to accomplish those strategic goals, abide by those principles. And then if we're talking about 8 rounds, if I draft 5 wide receivers, there's still a running back in there, right? I still have a running back that's probably a top 24 guy. That outline feels pretty good. Like, even for someone who says I really like running backs, it's like, well, don't you also probably like Lamar and Brock Bowers? You probably like them too, right? So I feel it feels like you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. But that cliff that occurs later is like something to keep in mind with the elite quarterbacks and the elite tight ends.
Yeah, and I think if we're going with 6 through 8 at the wide receiver position, it does allow you obviously to go in 2 picks and 2 different. That's how maths works. It adds up that way. But that also means so you basically have the 2 picks if you're going in a different direction, and that also I would highlight. For people who are wanting to take running backs, like if it was a Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, that's going to be something that's going to be hard to pass up as well. So if you were to take a running back, I would say in the first round rather than, unless it's Bucky Irvin in the second, you are open to those particular moves to get Brock Bowers, Trey McBride. The other 2 I would highlight, I know you mentioned Sam Laporta, but I do think Laporta, if you look at the numbers at the start of last season coming back off his injury, I know he came back the previous playoffs, but that was more so they were in the playoffs and he came back. But I don't think he was healthy till middle of last season, and the difference in his scoring from that midpoint to the end was quite different. And the other player that I think George Kittle might be the most mispriced player in all of fantasy.
Every year. It's like every year.
And the thing with it is, like, this year now, last year he was like tight end 8 or 9 at that point. It was kind of him, Brock Bowers, and then Njoku were going in the same range. So he's obviously more expensive than he was last year, but he's also in a much different environment in San Francisco than they were last year. You know, no Debo, you have Ayuk coming back from the injury, and a big shifting of the tide, and will Christian McCaffrey stay healthy and things like that. So I think he's interesting. And then when you mention the elite QBs, like I would be looking to get Daniels on the roster, then Jackson, then Allen in terms of that order. But like Joe Burrow's going very close to that range, and Jalen Hurts, and I'm really not interested in those names. I think what makes it really intriguing, you know, obviously you have the upside of the scoring, but what really comes into it as well is they are available in the flat zones of the draft board. So like if you are in the late second round and you're like, oh, you know, T. Higgins goes, and you're like, well, it's, you know, between Trey McBride, Josh Jacobs, Garrett Wilson, and Marvin Harrison. It's like, yeah, I'll take Trey McBride here. So it's the same when you get to the area where you're getting the other 3 quarterbacks, you know, Jackson, Allen, and Daniels going. It's another area where, unless there's somebody you really want to get there, it becomes quite easy to rather than go to the next tier of wide receiver, they're the elite tier of QB to add into the team. So I think like the key though for me is I would, if I could only pick one, I'm going to pick the tight end rather than the QB. And the reason is, you know, for years we've been, you know, using that quarterback window to fill out the quarterback room and not having maybe the same ceiling, you know, from the one player, but the combination of the 2 to 3 quarterbacks that you would have on the roster, being able to pair that together. It's very hard then to replicate that, you know, if Trey McBride or Brock Bowers are really having some of their like elite weeks, like nobody's going to match that. And it's very hard to do that pairing it through, you know, multiple tight ends later. So that is why I would prefer to have the elite tight end. But I have no problem, like, I know we're talking 0 RB, but if you're taking a running back like an Irving, like a Gibbs, and then taking the tight end and bypassing the QB and taking quarterbacks later on, I would be very open to that as well.
Shawn, it's funny that he brings that up, because that's exactly what was going to be what I was going to segue into. Who the hell doesn't love these elite quarterbacks? I am going to try to pitch you guys a little more on the Eagles thing. I really like the Eagles passing game this year, not from a projection standpoint. Like, if you said what's the most likely, right, gun to your head, you have to predict what happens with the Eagles offense. I would say, well, the same shit that happened last year, right? They're going to run the ball like crazy, and if they're going to be up by 28 points in the third quarter, and they're going to throw one more pass the rest of the game, and it might be Tanner McKee that throws it, and not Jalen Hurts. But in this scenario where the unforeseen happens, whether that's Saquon goes down, the defense is somehow not awesome anymore, right? Like, we've seen this the year that Mark Andrews just absolutely went scorched earth. That tight end was 4 years ago or something like that. Even though Lamar got hurt, Mark Andrews was going nuts, but the Ravens defense was just like obliterated by injury. Like, it was, I think I could have scored a touchdown on their DBs. It was like, you just played whoever was facing the Ravens secondary in that week. I'm not predicting that for the Eagles, of course, but in the scenario in which we somehow, some way get Eagles passing volume, like, now I'm like, oh man, okay, you know, tush push is still around for Hurts. So if AJ Brown goes out at the 1, we still get the nice benefits of that with Jalen Hurts. But we know how efficient and how consolidated the passing offense is. It's like, if I don't know what will happen, it reminds me of like Ricky Pearsall last year. It's like, I didn't really like him that much, but he got so cheap. I'm like, you know, Pat Kerrane, we've recorded, and he outlined it perfectly. He's like, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I know that a first-round pick on the 49ers at wide receiver, if it happens, is like, I'll take it, right, at this price. And that's kind of how I feel about the Eagles' offense, passing offense. But
does that put you out then on the Barkley at the 102? Like,
I have Saquon. I have Saquon out. Yes, not in the top 2. Full transparency, I have Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb.
Because it's very unlikely that we have a season like Barkley had where they have to pass it a lot more. It's like, that's unlikely.
Correct.
Yeah. So
they're so inversely correlated. So if you move away from Saquon, okay, there's like 3 of the 5 scenarios in which Saquon fails are really good, right? That Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert are like, that's really good for them. Like, they are probably underpriced in that scenario. It's just that it's like a coin flip of does that, does the
like
scenario
the way
through.
the market is priced at the minute is Saquon's going to do what he did last year, and Jalen Hurts is going to be able to be an elite quarterback based on like the tush push, and then the wide receivers aren't going to be able to do it. So like what I would be looking at
is absolutely useless, is what the market has said.
Well, that's
Tyler
probably,
Higbee or something.
that's probably true.
It's probably true.
But in terms of like, these are the things to look at in the off season, is like, where's the part of the board that people are telling themselves like, this is what's going to happen, like there's no other picture. And that the other area to do that is like teams where people are like, this team is just terrible, they're going to be terrible, there's no way they're going to be better. Like each year is a different NFL season, and things change a lot. Like even things like the Eagles defense was so good last year, like what if they like take a step back, or what if one of their defensive players like misses a chunk of the season? Then you're into like a very different picture where you have to factor in the Hurts passing and the wide receivers getting a lot more work, and Saquon Barkley not having as many carries late in games where he can break off those big plays.
100%. It's one of my favorite ways to draft, honestly. And I also think it does lend itself to maybe more of the 0 RB-ish principles. Although another scenario that I like scenario-based drafting is kind of how I like to approach it. Like if, right, because you can't do a bunch of media projections for all this stuff and factor in what happens if the Eagles defense gets worse? What happens if Saquon goes down? What happens if you can physically do it. It's just like all the permutations of that we would spend every waking moment of our lives.
It's more about making like the educated guess on the range of outcomes and then making a bet on those particular outcomes. Like the Packers are another example of it. It's like I could not have made a picture in my head last offseason that like Josh Jacobs was just going to be the entire Packers offense. Like we couldn't do that. So like now though, that is the way that the draft board is set up. Like that's going to continue, and I do not think that's the case.
I love that as a strategy. Another one, and then I promise I'll go back to the quarterback thing because I think it's a really good one. Is like, I know Frank Ragnow just retired, and that caught people probably caught Jared Goff by surprise, and so that's dampering some Lions love. But it's like, I don't know. I'm pretty goddamn confident Jahmyr Gibbs is just a lot better than David Montgomery, and David Montgomery's getting older. We moved on to a new offensive coordinator. Maybe they do have to pass a little bit more because Ragnow's gone. And it's like, so what happens when Jahmyr Gibbs is just unleashed? Right. And it's like, there's like decent, and like, I don't know, when you come into the season, you're like, yeah, D-Mont's going to get his 40% of the work or whatever. And he's going to hold Gibbs back from being, and it's like, I don't know, is Jahmyr Gibbs the 101? Like what happens when they throw more and they make Gibbs build the offense out of Jahmyr Gibbs? There's just like all those kinds of scenarios where I like to think through those, and then not like in every draft, but go in with that mindset and say, this is the one where Saquon goes down and the Eagles throw the ball 600 times. Right. And it's like, who do you want on that team? Well, all the passing game guys, but also probably Will Shipley on that team, because Saquon is gone. He's not going to replace Saquon, but he's clearly a valuable 17th round pick if Saquon Barkley is not along, et cetera, et cetera. But the quarterback thing, I think, is it kind of fits this perfect spot of all that quarterback window, all similar to the early wide receiver that I was talking about before, feels really nice this year. As much as I love the superstar quarterbacks, like I can't imagine a person playing fantasy football doesn't have at least a couple guys from whatever, Kyler to Trevor Lawrence or Michael Penix or whatever, that they love. Like I've never met someone so far in 2 months that somebody doesn't have like a guy that we may disagree on.
Is this something that you like ask in public? Do you
yeah, of course. The 3 times a year I leave my house, I walk around and I have the ADP list from underdog, from Kyler Murray to Michael Penix, and I say, tell me which one of these guys you're a big fan of. It's a fun. Try that one out next time.
I'll try it.
You leave the house. But there's so many guys there in that range, and they come after that wide receiver cliff that we're talking about. I actually don't love as much the running backs in that range. I actually love the running backs a little bit, early. So like to the 0 RB thing is like, I don't know. Why can't Gibbs be one of the detours, right? Or why can't Bucky be one of the detours, or Brees be one of the detours? Like that's not 0 RB, right? It doesn't show up in the definition of 0 running back. But if you still operate on those principles, come back, hit that quarterback window where that wide receiver drop off is, you can still accomplish all your goals and build this awesome team. It's just, so now you got two guys, right? Two quarterbacks or whatever in that window that just need to match what a Lamar Jackson did, kind of over the course of the season. It feels to me like that window blends so well into kind of all the principles of how we're talking about drafting today.
And I think round 9 is good for running backs. So you can do whatever you want through that first 8, and then you can come back and hit round 9. But round 10 and 11 is not great, at least for me, which means that now if you've done a pure 0 RB or an extreme 0 RB, you're in a little bit of trouble. And maybe especially if you've taken the elite QB, it does put pressure on you because rounds 10 and 11 are very good for QB. Not surprisingly, that's where the QB window is. And, would you still not prefer to have this year's Baker Mayfield, this year's Jaden Daniels? I mean, one of the things you have to be honest with yourself about, am I hitting on these players? And last year was very, very frustrating. I mean, more than, something like Saquon Barkley staying healthy and scoring. I think if you're drafting 0 RB and you're approaching it from the perspective of like every Sunday, then you don't enjoy the season because some superstar had a bunch of good games, then you're probably doing it wrong. You should just change it, because you shouldn't be rooting against greatness. You shouldn't be rooting for people to get hurt. None of those types of things. You need to be able to execute, what you want to do and allow that to simply still win. Right. I mean, the fact of the matter, and one of the reasons I'm sure that you don't have Barkley in the top 2 is that even with the extraordinary season he had, he didn't score that many points.
Right.
Right. And so, you get back to that. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. And so I don't say it that often because I don't think it's right to be like, he was unreal. But
this is a safe space.
But for me, I look at executing the 2024 season and I'm looking at the QB did what we recommended work, both for ourselves and for our listeners, subscribers, what have you. And it's like yes and no, because we were extremely high on Jaden Daniels, but the other 2 guys I really liked were CJ Stroud and Jordan Love. And that was not helpful, right? No. And so then you're kind of working through, part of the issue on teams that did have issues. I mean, lots of teams did really well, but you have this QB element where not only do you not have an elite QB, but the guys that you did put together to make these teams work are not working for you. So as you work through each season, you want to be taking the long view of, okay, generally the QBs we recommended have done well. One of the reasons that has been the case is that we do focus on elite talents, or what we think are elite talents, with interesting weapons who are going in this QB range that has historically outperformed. And so if you're doing all of those things together, then again, over a longer time frame, you should do fairly well. But you do want to continue to self-evaluate. The hard part with self-evaluating in the fantasy football is you're just looking at scenarios and looking at samples that are tricky, right? Because you always want to be open to new information. And yet the biggest risk I think that most fantasy drafters actually face is simply adjusting too much to the unique components of the previous season.
Bingo.
That's going to cause more problems for you than failing to evolve, or it's going to cause different but equally meaningful problems. And so as you work through it, those are going to be some things. I did want to note, kind of off topic a little bit now, but as you guys were discussing the scenario-based element, well, first of all, you talk about the Eagles receivers, and if you look about it from a talent perspective, you're taking AJ Brown, who's the wide receiver 10, and you're moving him up to, at the very least, wide receiver 6 in between Nabers and St. Brown. You're also taking Devontae Smith, who I kind of think, I understand why people are pricing him where he's being priced. I also have a lack of comfort taking him there. So I'm not saying, really he's doing it wrong, but it seems to me that there's a lack of understanding of just how good he was those last couple of years at Alabama, and then just how strong his first 4 years in the NFL have been. You look at those 6 years and you're like, I think you would replace him with AJ Brown. You put him in there at wide receiver 10 ahead of Vlad McConkey. So then if you look at it from that perspective and you're saying they throw more passes, then things become pretty interesting. They would be interesting regardless. But the receivers are that good. The one on the flip side of it is that, and it's hard to say this because I love both of these players, and I want them to score because fantasy and watching the games is more fun that way. But T. Higgins and Joe Burrow are being valued as though the Bengals are going to go out and play an entire season with like 9 defenders again. I mean, that's not super likely to happen.
That is 100% true. We talked through all these quarterbacks and we didn't even hit on Burrow because my mind is frankly still in a pretzel on the T. Higgins and Joe Burrow thing, because again, I see that scenario where, right, the same thing from the Bengals happens again this year, right? They're throwing a million passes. These guys are good at football, blah, blah, blah. But like, that's what the market is seeing as like, this is definitely going to happen. And those are just all, like, we're talking through all these different scenarios that I love to, not like exploit, because it's exploitable just in that it's priced for this X scenario. And when Y scenario happens, that's not the appropriate price, right? We're spotting wrong prices in either direction, right? Burrow and T could be priced way too high and the Eagles could be priced way too low. Who knows? But anything else, Colm, on that quarterback window? Because I do just think it happens to fit so perfectly into all this before we move into like some of the later rounds and how we can think about the later rounds in this season. I've found myself, as much as I love those elite guys, just living in this spot, because even like Shawn says it, once you get like what, past pick 100 or whatever into round 10 and stuff, the running back range is like, last year that was really fruitful. That was a range where there was a bunch of guys that we did quite like, but now those guys have gotten pulled up a little bit, right, as the running backs have gotten a little bit pricier. So it's just like a bunch of quarterbacks and frankly maybe some tight ends that are available there. That like last year I was like, I'm not so into this spot. Jaden, who we all loved, I think, Jaden Daniels. But then now this year we just dropped like 10 quarterbacks into this window where I'm like, what am I missing at other positions? Like not much. So I love living in that little pocket, and it kind of fits with again these principles, right? If you want to take total extreme zero running back, fine. But also if you want to take some detours for these running backs, quarterback is very forgiving in that regard. You're forgiven your sins, right, of the detours, because you can make it back, right? You can go do your Hail Marys at quarterback in round 10 and 11.
Yeah, and I think like when we look back at the end of the draft season, I am going to have like the majority of my teams will not have an elite quarterback on them. I'll be having the quarterbacks down in this range, and that's just because we're talking about where wide receiver falls off and so on. Like that is the area where you need to be picking up your wide receivers, and I can see myself like if you have the 106, like taking Jahmyr Gibbs in those rosters. So then I'm going to be like, well, if I want to get an elite tight end, I'm going to have to pass in the quarterbacks to be able to make that happen. When we look though at, I feel like there's a combination in the QBs of either players who people are like, well, they're veterans and they're not all that like, sexy to draft. The likes of even a Jared Goff, like quarterback 13, like is, I think, like Caleb Williams, we may get the second year jump from him and a lot of improvement, but he's QB 11. I think that's kind of mispriced at where he's going. But if we look from, let's say, Bo Nix at QB 9 all the way through then to, I would say Geno Smith or maybe even Cam Ward, but Geno Smith at quarterback 25. I think like we've got Geno moving to a different environment, so his price is reduced because of that, and maybe people are pricing in like the team decided to trade him away, so maybe he's not like any good anymore, but he's landing and he's going to be tethered to Brock Bowers. So like if you're drafting Brock Bowers, I think you should be drafting Geno Smith to go along with that. But like Bryce Young had a tragic 1.5 year start to his career, but he finished really strong at the end of last year. He's QB 23. And I think like there's a lot of question marks with how these players are. Like QB 21, is Michael Penix, overdrafted, wasn't going to start for multiple years, older rookie coming in. Well, he's a starter now entering year 2, but that kind of baggage that came in with him is holding down his price. To his quarterback 22, he has the concussion concerns, that's holding down his price. CJ Stroud had a bad season last year, QB 18. Like I think a lot of these guys are mispriced by multiple rounds in terms of like where they're going. I think we have the elite quarterbacks, and then we have the QBs that start going in kind of like round 9, because that's where the next group of people are starting to draft them. But then they're kind of like, well, all the quarterbacks are in this kind of 5-round range, and whatever order they go in, it doesn't really matter. Like, but you know, Jordan Love's quarterback 17. JJ McCarthy obviously missed his whole rookie season, but he's tethered to like Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson. He's QB 20. You know, there's lots of names in here where I think there's lots of opportunity. I talked about earlier, like, you know, how I like George Kittle, Brock Purdy's in there, but Drake May is somebody who me and Shawn last year had on quite a few teams, and we got to the end of the season, and basically the team were like, we can't afford to get this guy injured. We're not going to rush him anymore this season. And like, he's quarterback 15, but like, if we're looking at people with a rushing floor to have like an extraordinary season, and then surely the offense has taken some steps forward in the off season, you know, he's QB 15. I just feel like there's so many names in there, from like Dak is paired with Lamb. You get Jared Goff with all his weapons. Like, there's just QB 14 through, let's say 25. Like, give me 2 of those guys and like be able to get, because you're not going to replicate the wide receivers you're getting in that elite QB tier in this part of the draft.
100%. So we get through this, wherever we want to call that. The QB window has been shut. It started storming, so we shut the QB
and
window.
Just on the QB window, I do think like this is down to just people getting better at drafting, but correct me if I'm wrong, Shawn, but the way the quarterbacks are set up this year is very unique, where you have the elite guys, and then basically you have a long quarterback window, and then it's like, yeah, these guys at the end, nobody wants them. There's like 4 guys going in the last 5 rounds. It's like, I think it's quite unique versus previous years.
Well, I've been drafting a lot in the Superflex contest, and it's so hard to force myself to take enough early. And so then you're looking at this group of QBs that's terrible late, and that part of the process is also fascinating and interesting. But yeah, I mean, exactly what you guys are saying. When you combine
just draft Jackson Dart, then
when you combine the structure and then the tactics, I'm sure there are lots of great counter arguments to this, but I do think the elite QB works better in redraft than in best ball.
I think that's a phenomenal point that probably doesn't get mentioned enough. It's not that those guys aren't awesome. It's not that they can't, right? You get to they have a great season and you get to the playoffs and they spike, but the ability in redraft, and you guys are far better redraft experts than me, but how my dumb best ball brain constantly thinks about redraft, and another reason why I enjoy the zero running back principles, is like, make my Sunday morning decision making as easy as possible. Like, who I know I'm starting these 6 or 7 guys. I don't care, right? I don't care about wide receiver cornerback matchups. I don't care about that. You know, I don't care. I'm starting Lamar, right? I'm starting Brian Thomas. I'm starting Brock Bowers. I'm starting them. Like, it doesn't, like, nothing matters. And then we got to come in, right? And I'm like, oh God, yeah. Is it Amir Abdullah week, or is it, you know, whoever, you know, we're doing that. I would rather do that though, right? Be like, my RB2 is like, oh boy, this is tough decision making, as opposed to, like, I got 3 quarterbacks on my roster and I got to roll this dice, and like, you're wrong all the time, right? Like, you know, am I doing Penix
Shawn,
versus McCarthy versus it's probably fun because the conversation is fun, but like, I like the, like, yeah, my team rocks. Let's decide between a couple of my last spots. But in best ball, that's very different, right? It's very different because you can like layer in all this stuff and you don't have to worry about who's starting, right? JJ McCarthy's big week, got it in my lineup, right? I didn't have to decide whether it was him or Trevor Lawrence or Michael Penix or whatever. There's just like those little nuances of the best ball game that I think get missed a little bit in elite quarterback and sometimes elite tight end, though this year is possibly a little different, are maybe not even mentioned enough, just because of how, right, I draft 18 or 20 guys and whatever happens in the given week, and I don't have to deal with the decision-making process.
Yeah, Ben and I had a stretch at the end of last season where we had a really good main event team and like 4 interesting QBs. Obviously they weren't great, or else it wouldn't have been such a, I think we picked the lowest scoring of the 4, either like 5 consecutive weeks down the stretch, or like 4 out of 5, or we picked like the 3rd or worse, like 5 consecutive weeks. I mean, and that's not through,
that's a skill in itself.
Well, I mean, you're always looking at it, and obviously there have been great shows through the years, and you will stream and outperform, but that doesn't mean you're going to stream and outperform because of matchups in any like meaningful and important stretch. I mean, you can stream and underperform through the entire sprint to win $1 million. And then you're just like, well, I mean, we have actually got other players on the bench at running back and wide receiver. This would have been a team where if you had a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson, multiple decisions would have been easier. And so, it
definitely doesn't mean that you can't stream, right? I only do a few main events a year, and I'm trying to remember who we had last year, a similar thing, the best team that I drafted last year, where we were constantly streaming like Geno versus somebody, it was like we really like kind of punted off quarterback, and it worked out okay, but the stress of that, and the constant whiffing. But I also feel like this year, I don't know if it's better or worse, but I've been more confident. Colm, you talked about this year being a little bit different at the quarterback position, where I've kind of had like super late quarterback, like even beyond this window that we're talking about, like super, like I drafted 50% Sam Howell a couple of years ago, like across a lot of
that feels low.
Yeah, I know exactly. And I was looked at like a crazy.
We had the other 50%.
Yeah, right. All of the Sam Howell teams in Best Ball Mania are here on this show talking, but like last year, I took a metric ton of Sam Darnold, and because it was just like you talked all the features that you talked about for JJ McCarthy, right, including KOC as is the quarterback whisperer, literally whispering in Sam Darnold's ear, like that. Those things were so valuable to me at such a cheap price, so that informed a lot of my other draft. I don't have that so much this year. Like I don't like Sam Darnold this year like I liked Sam Darnold last year. Like we could talk about Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck and all these different guys. But you do get into these later rounds now, and where I've been often looking for maybe a super cheap tight end, which I'm not, opposed to this year, but oftentimes a super cheap quarterback that I really, really like. It doesn't exist so much this year. Another kind of unique element to 2025. So that window becomes more powerful. But then, Shawn, like if we're abiding by all these principles, right, we get our 5 and 8 or 6 and 8, we wherever our detours go, we manage this quarterback window. How do you think about the later rounds now? Like again, following, it doesn't have to be straight zero running back. I don't want to make it all about that, but following these kind of principles that we know work, you get into round 14 plus. How is 2025 looking to you in those late rounds?
So I think it's fascinating because for me, the thing where I try in best ball, and again, this is an area where I do think it's completely different because in redraft, you really are just going to take all the rookies. But in best ball, you're trying to have a little bit of that discipline to mix in some of your other favorites if you can find any. I mean, the reason you take rookies as opposed to veterans is that there's a much larger range of outcome. There's probably a much larger information gap, right? The reason it's difficult to beat everybody else with the truly late picks is that with veterans is that you're talking about handcuffs, which will create holes in your lineup in the same way that 0 RB rookies who don't play until week 12 will. Or you're talking about a scenario that pops that is just very, very unforeseen. And you can do all the research that you want, and you're probably not going to come up with that scenario other than just drafting a lot of guys and hitting on luck, right? It's difficult to find veterans who are mispriced to where they're going to be in that range simply because we have information. However, you are wanting to mix it up a little bit so that you do get some points and so that you have teams where you don't have all of these late round hits that are then balanced out and ruined by late round misses that are just, zeros. At least that's the thing that I'm trying to work through for myself, because I do think that, again, we're in a season that is unique enough where you have guys who are very good players and also have very clear paths to playing, like Taj Brooks and Trevor Etienne, who, basically are being rarely drafted, right? Why would you not want those picks for round 18 for a wide variety of reasons? What picks do you need to make to complement them, to set those picks up? Can you simply go almost exclusively rookie this year because the rookies are so strong? And if you use the rules from other seasons, you're going to limit yourself in a way that simply doesn't make sense for 2025. So I think that's where it's so interesting in terms of the conflict that you might have as a drafter late, even if you're setting up, a portfolio, because frankly, there are just so many rookies that even if you draft rookies all down the stretch, they wouldn't be the same guys every time because there are so many options.
I love that. Also, I am a noted Taj Brooks slappy, and while I was excited for the Bengals landing spot, I was not excited for the draft capital. And I've been trying to, like an addict, I'm going to my AA meetings and being like, dude, it's only June. Just wait a little bit before you take him in every single draft or whatever. And Shawn is not helping, right? Shawn, before I go to the meeting, Shawn's got his flask and handing it to me to see, it's full of Taj Brooks in there. But Colm, what do you think about the kind of this late round conversation?
I think
how do we put the bow on top?
I think you should make sure you're drafting Taj Brooks. I think that's the first thing to say.
I should not have invited you on to this to talk here today.
The thing with we look at how can you get unique with some of these teams? You can get unique by drafting players who are going undrafted that should be getting drafted very easily to add something to your team. When we talk about week 17 and the playoffs and what combinations, the combinations can be much lower because it's not getting drafted. The one thing I would say about certain there's other players who are in the same boat who are going undrafted, but sprinkling them and alternating them from drafted out. The thing is, if they start having good reports over the next 5 weeks, they're going to be going in the 15th round. So they're not going to be undrafted, but you're going to be going in the 15th. So then you can't put the combination of the other players together. But when you look at round 14 onwards here, in terms of the name, Roschon Johnson, Braille and Allen are going in 14. But then Will Shipley, you mentioned earlier, is a 15th round running back. If we're looking at big gaps in ADP, you have him. You also have Marshawn Lloyd going in the 16th round, Jarquez Hunter, DJ Giddens. I talked about Jonathan Taylor, and can he kind of rekindle some of his youth, I guess, but really those last 3 weeks of last season. J.K. Dobbins, there's his ADP is going to go up now once he gets signed here. But you get into a very interesting crop with Devin Neal is down there. Rashard Smith is then, in the 18th round. And then you mentioned Brooks going undrafted. There's a lot of names in those last 4 rounds that you can easily add 4 additional running backs to your roster. And when we look at the names then, at the wide receiver or tight end position, I think the tight ends at that point are more interesting than a lot of these wide receivers. Mm-hmm. We will say hat tip to Pat Bryant at wide receiver 73, just because Shawn's on the show here. But we do also have a lot of interesting tight ends down there at the back end of the draft. So if you are trying to filter those out, and I say a lot of them, Terrence Ferguson is the main one of them that we would be kind of targeting, but he's a last round pick as well. I think there's just a lot of interesting ways to play it. And one of the things I kind of talk about every season is drafting from back to front of these draft boards. And if you take this draft board, I'm looking at the RotoViz website now, and if you printed it out and you're what am I going to do in each round to draft the perfect team from back to front here? Realistically, you're probably going to take 1 tight end and 3 to 4 running backs over those last 5 rounds. And then you're going to build yourself back up through the quarterback window where you're going to take 2 of those guys. And then we talked about already, you're going to want to have 6 wide receivers through 8. You're going to want to have your elite tight end, build out your team that way. And I think this year gives you a really, sometimes we're looking at the back end of drafts and we're well, there's 5 players I like, there's 1 pair round. And it's if I get all those, I'll be very happy with how my team fills out. I feel basically the 16th round with Marshawn Lloyd, Hunter, Giddens, J.K. Dobbins, it's go get yourself a running back. It's you have to pick a running back in this round. So I think that it sets up really well at the back end of the draft for Zero RB. And I also come back to that point a bit earlier about people not being comfortable drafting a team and having those guys as a key part of your running back room. I think that a lot of people will try and have their running backs prior to those last 6 rounds, and that leaves that more of an opportunity where people are probably making suboptimal picks, taking wide receivers maybe or tight ends we won't be looking to draft in that area. And I think that makes it just, again, another nice nod to kind of the way we want to draft working out this season.
I'm so glad that you mentioned, kind of circled it all back to front drafting, because that's outside of a lot of the principles that we talked about here today, maybe the most
What's the
important.
jigsaw? It's like, put the jigsaw together. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's like when you think about the things that I can get for the cheapest price,
with the highest upside,
with the best chance to win me a lot of money, right? And so I start there and then build up to the expensive stuff. It's probably going to convince you to, again, not necessarily like can't draft a running back for the first 8 rounds, but think about how much and how often you're detouring to running backs. Or you love Tyler Shuck. You think he's going to be the next Drew Brees, right? I may not agree with you, but that should, right? The Sam Darnold thing I talked about from last year, the Sam Howell thing from a couple of years ago, that informed my decision, right? The reason why I drafted the way that I did was because I'm like, I got this guy in the 17th round that is a huge he's the best pick, right, in that round. So now what do? Right? I don't need to keep taking maybe I'm only taking one window quarterback because I got that guy who I think should go in the window, who's available to me later. And it's not even always just like my player take either, right? It is like I get back to that end of the draft and like maybe you don't like Taj Brooks or you don't like Jarquez Hunter or whatever, but you're like, but do you love, Pop Douglas? But do you love these other guys either? No, the ceiling for the running back at
do you want Michael Wilson?
Yeah, Michael Wilson. I mean, if you love watching a big, slow guy run a lot of routes, you are going to love watching. By the way, this is my concern for Trey McBride is he's borderline the fastest player on their offense as the tight end. Like him and Marv are like close in speed, and they're the fastest players on the offense. Like I love Trey McBride so much, but it's giving like this whole the Cardinals are like they're like playing NBA basketball without shooting 3-pointers. It's like this seems scary.
It's pretty funny because I believe there was a report in the last however many days with him specifically talking about how they were going to use more motion. And listening to you say this, like he's like, and believe me, it was just so they could keep getting me open because I'm the only person who can get open, and I've got to move around some so the defense isn't double and triple teaming me.
They were trying. The whole touchdown thing was hilarious last year, but it was like they were being so blatantly obvious because they had no alternative to get anyone open when they got towards the goal line. It was like they were like, 3-step throw to Trey, right? Was the play call. Like they weren't even using real play calls. They were just like, Kyler, just throw it to him. Just pray, right? Like, because we got no alternatives because all these other guys suck. So they didn't exactly make that look better this year. So I have some very real Cardinals concerns, but Trey McBride's awesome. We'll deal with it. But I want to wrap here with let's do a couple like rapid fire kind of questions that like first like some specific players or teams or stacks or whatever for a lot of these things that we talked about here today, right? Like, let's start with what we just talked about. You got one late running back that is your back to front draft, right? You're like, I'm back to front drafting and I know that running back is available to me in 15, 16, 17, 18 or whatever. He's informing a lot of these decisions. Why I'm being a little lighter than the field is at running back. Colm, who is that late round running back for you?
Jarquez Hunter. And I think like it's going to be quite high when it gets to the end of the season as to how much he's drafted. When we look at the running backs, I've mentioned Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor already, but Kyren Williams last season, performed pretty well from a fantasy perspective, but a lot of that is tethered to like getting in the end zone. If he doesn't get in the end zone, and like Stafford had a really poor season overall, and it got worse as it went on. But Kyren Williams was tethered to the on the ground stuff, not getting used much in the passing game, not much receiving yards. A lot of it's just on opportunity and attempts, and getting in there. So if somebody actually comes in and they're like, yeah, this guy like is better than Kyren Williams, I think that we're going to see him like work into that work, but I could see him potentially overtaking it. Like I think Kyren Williams is this year's Rashad White. It's kind of where I'm leaning with it.
Ooh, I love it. Spicy. Shawn?
Well, kind of going back to that idea of you got to get some veterans in there to balance the team out. Now, this is like not the right way to do it because it's not like you get exactly the same veteran every time. But I probably have like 100% J.K. Dobbins so far because the price is going to go up. And so then you don't end up with nearly that much later. According to a lot of the SIS data here, it looks pretty clearly like Derrick Henry and Bucky Irving were the two best backs against heavy boxes last year, but then Dobbins was the third best. Dobbins' price is absolutely absurd. I'm probably
crazy.
just thinking about it incorrectly somehow, but it doesn't seem right. If we remove him, then I have to do the kind of the biased play of seeing it through my rose-colored Kansas City glasses, where Brashard Smith is actually quite good. And the numbers that he put up last year, when you consider that he was transitioning, were fantastic. And you're talking about a backfield where, yes, Pacheco was hurt when he came back from injury, and we can't really evaluate him based on that, but he's always been poor. And so when you get that contrast, I think that you're probably looking at workload concerns with Smith. That's why he's valued where he is. I think those are very legitimate, right? I wouldn't expect him to go out and carry 20 times in week one or probably ever. Mm-hmm. But the contrast for the coaches is going to be so extreme as you move through camp and the season that I think you certainly want to create some exposure there.
I also was hoping he would go a little bit higher just because, very real workload concerns for sure. He's extremely small. Was a former wide receiver, as you mentioned. But just
I wonder when we look back on the draft capital from this year's class, how much of it will have been like just there was so much depth in this year's class that people were
too many guys.
Happy to wait. We'll take the guys. And then a bit like if we're doing like a draft ourselves, we're like we don't want to be at the outside of that tier, but if we're at the last player of that tier, we're pretty happy with that.
I'm fascinated to see how that plays out because there's a lot of guys I really, really liked that went in the 6th and 7th rounds of this draft, and also maybe some guys I didn't love going in like the 4th round, but nonetheless,
the Texans are like, we really want Joe Mixon to score a lot of points.
Yeah, we like Joe Mixon.
What are we mortgaging the future for Woody Marks for? And that they gave up a future 3rd to move up to get Woody Marks. I was like,
can he play offensive line?
We don't get it. No, he's going to get hurt like Tank did. He's a little guy. They're gonna have him blocking, and he's going to get rolled over on, just like Tank Dell did, and ruin that guy's career. That was very, very strange. Taj Brooks is available in like the last round, and these guys are trading future 3rd round picks for Woody Marks. But the Texans have built a really good team, and it has not been through a lot of their own awesome decision making. They've done a lot of interesting things, but. Back to fantasy. I wanted to ask if you had to pick an early running back that you were like, look, I know we're sitting here talking about zero running back, but there's this guy I'm going to be making some exceptions for, right? And I'll let you early running back, let you guys decide what's that going to be. Who's the early running back detour? You can do Shawn first. That's your favorite this year.
I don't think that I have gotten him much, and so that would draw this into the question. But I do think that when you're talking about Jeanty, you're talking about someone who has the mixture of traits that both make it almost impossible to miss, and to be someone where like a couple of years later, people are just like, I mean, he's okay, but he wasn't, what we thought. It's also a mix that's fantastic for fantasy. It's also something where I do a lot of different pieces where I write the sort of rushing EP versus rushing fantasy points over expected. How do we want to look at that mix? What are the different traits? What are the different profiles? How do we get to this eventual profile that allows us to win in fantasy? And again, it kind of goes back to that point we made earlier, is that the running backs did well, but there still weren't these workload profiles that are really ideal to say, like, this is a guy you desperately want to have in the first round. I mean, the problem with Jeanty, of course, is that you have this uncertainty and you have what probably will be a pretty bad offense. And the pretty bad offense part does negate most of what I'm saying, really. And yet, I mean, he's going to have the biggest workload of any running back in the NFL. And so from that perspective, if you believe he's that good, I mean, and people do, he's being drafted in the first round. So it's not like there's any like exploitable opportunity there. It's just that if you get that pick, you might go ahead and take it.
Has there ever been a projected, like, universally thought of worse offense that had two players basically be first round fantasy picks?
It's bizarre. We just had a long conversation in the
And this is
Spike
where
Week
the
Discord
Geno
today.
price then makes no sense at QB 25. Like, if the offense is going to support the two of those guys, unless they're going to have Jeanty throw the passes to Brock Bowers, I think it's like we have to factor in that, tell ourselves the story of how it all plays out at some point.
And I'm generally a big naysayer of kind of the logic that you just said, where it's like people will say, right, we did this with like Big Ben for years. People will still do this with Matthew Stafford, right? Jimmy G, whatever, where they're like, how can we be taking all of their guys, by X? And it's like, well, it's because he's kind of like a point guard. He's not scoring fantasy points, right? He's distributing to these guys. But Geno is like, no, like this is one of those scenarios where it's like, no, this is supposed to be a legendary running back and a legendary tight end. And it's not like they're completely lacking for other weapons. It's a new regime. Geno's been good. We were taking Geno like before this in a worse offense, So anyway, I agree. I totally agree. On Geno. Let's do favorite early wide receiver then. So you're not detouring, and this guy is your priority, Shawn. Who's the early wide receiver that you're kind of really tying your ship to?
And I just want to go back, Shawn. I can't believe you didn't pick Jahmyr Gibbs as your running back.
You've talked about him throughout the show. Okay. I was going to leave him for you.
I just skipped over you, by the way, Colm. So do your running back and then you.
Oh, it's Jahmyr Gibbs.
Wide receiver.
Yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs.
He's pretty good.
And you mentioned earlier, he would be the 101 if we didn't know. Like, he's in a great offense. He just has like somebody who the team, like, it's not even that he's in a situation where there's somebody like nipping at his heels. It's like the team just wants to use this game. At some point, it's going to become the Jahmyr Gibbs show, whether it's this season or next season. Like, and the only problem is they might want to, like, we're a team that's going to make the playoffs, so we want to keep him fresh for that. But like, he probably should be the 101 based on talent here in this group.
But like even then, I totally agree with that point, like wholeheartedly. But like even then, we see things happen in football seasons where you're just like they would still probably like to get the bye, right? These teams like still want to win regular season football games. Now that means he may not play 90% of the snaps ever, right? But like we don't need 90% of the snaps for anyone, nonetheless. For Jahmyr
I think
Gibbs.
we need 12 carries and 5 receptions a week, and I think we'd be happy for Gibbs because I think he just rips it apart with that, even those numbers.
He scored like 4 touchdowns against the Vikings on almost that volume. It's just
like, we're not asking for much. Just like give him some high value touches here, please.
Yes, exactly. He is full disclosure. He is my answer to that too. I'm not like getting out over my skis on early running backs because I still believe like in a lot of the stuff we talked about here today. But when I'm making some detours for the particularly early one, I really like.
And just a question on it, where would you be willing to take him? Like, he's going an underdog as the running back 3 at spot 6. Puka Nacua is going after him. Nabers going after him. St. Brown's going after him. I would be thinking more if Puka's gone, and like I don't like. I'm not pulling the trigger exactly at like 5. I'm at 6 or beyond, and preferably at 8.
I have him, I believe, at 7. But behind Puka and Nabers, so somewhere in there. I do, admittedly, one thing I like to do. You talked about the unique combos with some of these guys. I like to make detours for. We talked the kind of at the beginning of like building these 0 running back teams. I know it's a Jahmyr Gibbs team, but building with the principles that other early running back drafters would not build with. And so like, I'll be like, look, I'm just going to take Gibbs in this draft, right? I do so many drafts, which can be a detriment. Sometimes you get a little fancy play syndrome, but I'll be like, I'm just going to take him 2nd overall. And then it's like, cause then now, right, he's normally going 6th or 7th or whatever. The guys I'm going to get at the 2-3 turn are just not generally drafted with Jahmyr Gibbs. And then I'm going to draft I'm going to draft with the principles we talked about here today. You can kind of have your cake and eat it too. Like, if you're coming in thinking like, oh, these idiots are just going to talk about 0 running back. It's like, I think you can blend all this stuff together and still make really, really strong teams. But again, it's just like combining all these 10 or so principles we talked about today. I really like doing it with him. Wide receiver. Colm, start us, since I tried to kick you to the curb, and you were going to talk about my guy, and I tried to kick you to the curb.
And this is just like a wide receiver you have to have,
yeah. Wide receiver have to have, again, early rounds. Pick your poison. What that means.
Yeah, it's fun because I really feel like it is like pretty much a tier for me all the way to Mailk Nabers. Like when you have Chase, Jefferson, Lamb, Puka, Nabers. And the reason I'm going to pick Puka is because, like you talked about at the start of the show, we just bypass him. So let's not bypass him here. I did a show on the RotoViz Fantasy Football show a couple of weeks ago. We talked third-year wide receivers. It might have been with Shawn on OT, but I think it was on the fantasy show. There's too many shows; they're all blending into one. But yeah, I've like finished it up, and then like 3 or 4 days later, I'm like looking. I typed in Puka, and I'm looking through the numbers, and I'm like, there's only 2 seasons of information here. It's like, oh yeah, Puka's going into his 3rd season. It's like, let's go for the young guy. Nabers is up there, Thomas is up there going into their 2nd year. So like obviously we're like they're the young guys, but like Puka is like it's incredible what he's done through the opening 2 seasons of his career. And I know Davante Adams there be still in a really hot environment for him to have success this year as the wide receiver 1 in that offense. So I'll go with Puka, but I do open book those first 5 wide receivers. I'm like, give me any of them.
That's actually why it's more so than anything about Saquon Barkley or about Bijan Robinson, why it's difficult for me to take those guys and Jeanty to a lesser degree, CMC, whatever, is that like all of those guys rock. Yeah. Like they're all awesome. Like we could make a case for all of them, and then they're kind of all smattered across the first round. The biggest thing for Puka to me is yes, I think everybody thinks Puka's like 28 years old or something like that is what it feels like.
He also came in like unheralded as a rookie, and
yeah.
I talked about the baggage some of the guys potentially have, from previous seasons for the quarterback position. But I think like people are like, well, Puka, he wasn't like that highly thought of, so maybe he's not that good. It's like, yeah, this guy's he's very good.
They're waiting for him to turn into a pumpkin, I think, or something.
Not going to happen.
It's kind of what it is. He also only has 9 touchdowns in two seasons. It's like he's not even scoring 5 touchdowns a season. Imagine when the touchdowns come.
That's like 9 touchdowns more than
your Kyron point, right? It's like, okay, Kyron, yeah. If he's when Puka scores 10 touchdowns, he'll score 9 more than Trey McBride scores this year. But like, imagine when the Kyron touchdowns go a little bit more to Puka. It's like,
or they get into the end zone rather than they get like tackled inside the 5.
Yep. 100%. So I'm with you on Puka, Shawn, early wide receiver, and then we'll do one quarterback question and get out of here.
The first round is just incredible, as you guys are saying. You look at Chase, and obviously if you have the first pick, I think you're going to take Chase. But it is interesting. I mean, Lamb has the, depending on what format you're talking about, what scoring system, but essentially a 400-point season. Very difficult to back that up. You're not going to get the same thing again. You think about Chase, what he did as a rookie, and then a couple years where he struggled to back it up. Now, some of that, you missed a couple games. It's going to knock your full season numbers down, what have you. But we're back to where it feels inevitable that he's going to score at that level. And it's inevitable he's going to score really well. But you have a Higgins behind you. Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the NFL. And yet all kinds of structural reasons or contextual reasons why even at the 3rd pick, it's a little bit tough. I mean, Jordan Addison is phenomenal. You have the tight end. You have some positives in the dome and the coordinator, but I mean, we're going to have JJ McCarthy. CeeDee Lamb has the Pickens element. Puka has which I don't necessarily know is that big a deal, but it has the Davante Adams element. I don't think any of these guys are completely clean, because the person that I'm going to suggest is not completely clean at all. But in a piece I'm working on Nabers, I included this additional sort of section working through, what were the best wide receiver collegiate seasons in recent memory. And certainly when you go back through it, you see things like the Davante Adams seasons. You see things like the Jerry Jeudy seasons where the yards per route run numbers, and yards per route run is not the whole story. Blair just had a great article on that. But the numbers they did with the teammate competition they had was pretty crazy. But Ja'Marr Chase, what he did with Justin Jefferson, and then Malik Nabers, what he did with Brian Thomas. I mean, Brian Thomas might be the 2nd or 3rd best receiver in the NFL. And then you look at Nabers in that offense last year, and he doesn't have someone to pull the targets away. With Malik Nabers, you're looking at someone who, unless he's hurt, and that's the same thing you can say for anybody, but you're talking about a healthy, almost lock in an absurd 32-33% target share type of range. You're talking about him maybe gapping the field in targets on the season. Now, can you do that when your quarterback is as bad as Russell Wilson? Maybe not. Can you do it if you're going to make a midseason move to a rookie who's developmental? I mean, we like Jackson Dart, so maybe he's not that developmental, right? But again, maybe not. But I mean, there's a very real scenario where Mailk Nabers is just like clearly the best receiver in the NFL next year, because one of the things with Nabers is these ability to get open almost regardless of the situation, the freakish athleticism. And then what he does with the ball in his hands is absolutely absurd. One of the things that you look at with all of these guys in that kind of top 5 wide receiver range is that it's everything, right? The reason they're such unbelievable superstars is that you cannot stop them from getting open, and then you do not want them to have the ball. They are absolutely dynamic once they have it. Nabers might be the most of all of them. And so you put that kind of potential target volume together with the talent, it's enough to make you say, maybe he can do it with any QB. This almost got to be your thesis, because I don't think the QB play is going to be good.
He kind of did it with any quarterback just last year, and he's probably only going to get better. One of my favorite moments from last season was in week 17. So, the championship week, but the best ball finals, right? Millions and millions of dollars being doled out. Mailk Nabers was my highest owned wide receiver. I didn't win any tournaments or anything like that, but I had Nabers on essentially every finals team that I had. And you're like, Drew Lock, you're like, God, like what? Like, it's not like Daniel Jones is better, but at least I had a proof of concept that he was scoring fantasy points with Daniel Jones. And you're just like, God, what a terrible run out, And then it's like he single-handedly put Drew Lock on his back with a screen pass and a 5-yard hitch that he took both of them, 60 yards to the house. And you're just like, the whole defense is centered around him. And he's just like, he's playing Frogger, just dipping and dodging in through the traffic and taking plays. The week 17
and
game,
he was hurt.
Yeah, and he was not even helped. That was one of the most incredible performances like I can remember from a wide receiver, given the context around it. Like, other guys have had awesome games, but given everything that was on him, to be able to do that and just carry a team was absolutely unreal. He's special, and hopefully we can get some competent quarterback play, because what I would love to see him with an awesome quarterback. To wrap, speaking of the quarterbacks, we talked about that window, so we're piecing it all together here. We talked about the tight ends enough. But we got some of these running backs we've discussed. We got some of these superstar wide receivers. Who is the quarterback, Shawn, that's going to kind of tie it all together? It doesn't have to be in that window, but if there is a guy, in that window that's kind of tying it all together, kind of this back to front drafting stuff, I can get these guys because this quarterback's available to me.
Well, one of the things I wrote about in the big gorilla blueprint was that you do have these guys. Anytime that you're talking about any position, certainly I think we're looking maybe at trying to figure out how we match the elite QBs. Anytime that you're sort of at the convergence of several different ideas or traits that could really launch someone, that's going to be pretty positive. And so when we think about guys like May and Williams, who have, and Bo Nix is a little bit more expensive, and we had 1,000% Bo Nix last year. I don't exactly understand why he's going where he's going, even though I do think, he's probably overpriced. And so, but you have that same sort of element where you get both second year leap and you get rushing. And anytime that you do that, then there are multiple ways that you could be right. And if both of them hit, then you're talking about now it's a huge, huge win. So I think from that perspective, it's pretty interesting. If we want to go a little bit, more off of kind of what we've been discussing, I do think that play, as you were going through Sam Howell, as you were going through Sam Darnold, certainly if you end up with a lot of Tech McMillan, then Bryce Young's end of last season was very, very good. And I think he could be that guy at the end.
You got to pair him with Adam Thielen. He's clearly his guy. I think we'll look back if we do have a situation where Bryce Young goes on to have like a really good career. I think we'll look back at like Adam Thielen. If he got to the Hall of Fame, let's say, which I don't think is going to happen, like Adam Thielen should be inducting him, because I don't think we get here without Thielen last season bailing them out on some of those early completions.
And being just at least a little bit of a foundational rock for him when he started to turn it on down the stretch. Like people,
he was making incredible catches. Like he has no athleticism left, but like he makes some incredible catches.
He's running in quicksand, but he makes awesome, right? He has to make the awesome
he can
catches.
dive the last 5 yards.
Exactly. But I always remember, like, it did make me appreciate Thielen a little bit more, because if you remember the Panthers-Eagles, and Bryce is marching the field to go beat the Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles, right? This team that we just talked about beats the shit out of everybody and runs it down their throats so they never have to pass. And Bryce is keeping them in the game and marching down the field. And Xavier Legette is like the gif of the little kid where they toss him the ball and she goes like this and it goes through her hands and hits her in the face. It was like that. Like all Legette has to do is catch a dime from Bryce Young, and Bryce Young leads a comeback to beat the Super Bowl champs. And like, he just had no help. I mean, he like Jalen Coker's whatever, fine, right? Like he just had no help. So if T-Mac can set him over the top, that would be absolutely incredible. But so I'm with you on Bo Nix, but Bryce, I love the Bryce shout, because we didn't talk enough about him. But Colm, what about quarterback for you?
There's a lot of guys in this range, but I like Drake May for the rushing potential. I think he's like, again, if we're looking at offenses that aren't going to be very popular, I think he's easily stackable as well to add some of his pieces in and around it. I think we're going to see a big change this year back to kind of maybe what we've seen at the end of 2 seasons ago from the Packers offenses. So I think Jordan Love, along with his receivers, are very interesting. I just keep coming back to CJ Stroud. Like he had a really down last year, but I mentioned also the factor that like we lost Nico Collins for a huge chunk of the season. Tank Dell was coming into the season injured, and then obviously Stephon Diggs started the season, but then he went out injured. The offensive line was not like I feel like there's a lot of similarities between those two offenses last year, and the Packers and the Texans, and then they were like, yeah, all our players are injured, so let's just give it to our running back as many times as possible. And then they were having some success based on how defenses were setting up in the NFL, being like, well, we'll give them those 5-yard carries over and over. We're not going to give up the explosive plays. And I think both teams kind of got baited into just that was their offense the rest of the season then. So I'm expecting the Packers and the Texans to be much better offensively this year. And at QB 19, along with the weapons you can pair him with, I like CJ Stroud.
I love that one. It's so funny because we were all excited, I think rightfully excited, for CJ Stroud and the Texans offense as a whole. Remember, like Nico going early, second round or so.
Well,
and
if we look at like overcorrections, like he's going as QB 19, and I mentioned Williams earlier, like going like so much earlier than he is. Like it's QB 11, but it's like 2.5 rounds earlier. It's like one of them had a dreadful rookie season, one of them had a pretty good one, but we've paired CJ Stroud now closer to Bryce Young than to Caleb Williams.
It is kind of crazy. Like Caleb is getting all of the benefit of the doubt from a horrible season, and Stroud is getting no benefit of the doubt, because of Ben Johnson and an infusion of talent around him. And it's like, well, CJ Stroud got rid of fake sharp PFF Bobby as his coordinator too, and I'm not saying he got an infusion of talent, but I don't know, 2 intriguing rookies. Not Woody Martin.
Don't forget Christian Kirk's there too.
He brought in the whole Iowa State pass game into Houston, and then Christian Kirk. But I mean, we were excited last year, and now he's going, like you said, closer to Bryce Young than to these other quarterbacks. I want to shout one more guy out, and that is Brock Purdy. I think one of you guys alluded to earlier that like the situation for George Kittle is more advantageous even than last season, with no Debo, Ayuk coming back from injury, and thus the target competition. Ricky Pearsall already hurt so far this summer. Like CMC, we'll see what's going on there. I also think that the 49ers defense is going to take a pretty giant. They already took a step back last year, but probably take yet another very big step back. And Brock Purdy, the $50 million man now, like you got to shoulder the burden. Now, if you're going to earn that money, we're going to have to lean on you. I think he has a little more rushing upside than maybe the world thinks that he does. And I think we still think about him more as just like, and I mean, who isn't a little bit of a system quarterback, especially with Shanahan. But I think from an upside perspective, we've yet to see the true best from Brock Purdy. upside wise. So that's going to do it here. This was a ton of fun. I appreciate you guys coming on. A lot of different subjects, of course, talking a lot of zero RB, but just kind of how some of the principles of that strategy apply to 2025. So a ton of fun. I don't know if you guys got anything you want to shout out before we get out of here that you guys got coming or that you've worked on. I know, Shawn, you've mentioned some different articles and shows and everything that you guys got, but feel free, please, to pop anything here before we go.
Well, I have about 6 articles in progress. That's what you do, right? Don't ever
only
finish
6.
Just write a bunch.
Get an idea, right? Get another idea, right? Yep.
Once you've satisfied your own interest, then just go on to the next thing. And then, yeah, Colm and I are doing OT. Ben and I are doing Stealing Bananas. We're having a blast through the summer here.
And I'll give a shout out as well. The RotoViz Fantasy Football podcast, we've kicked it off again over the off season. We had Erik. I think, Erik, you might have been guest 1 or 2. But yeah, we've had lots of different people on over the last couple of weeks and months. Kind of the ship chasing crew have been on. Justin Herzig on next week. Tom Strachan was on this week. So lots of people coming up, but a wide variety of topics as well discussed there, and short 30-minute shows. So check that out.
Ton of fun. Thank you guys again for joining. Hopefully we'll be able to get back again later this summer, and good luck to everybody in your drafts, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.